Hi everybody! I'm getting set up here. And give people time to come on. I set this up, it's supposed to share into the group as well. So, two birds with one stone. Instead of making a meeting group, we'll see if that works. You know, the Facebook meeting rooms or whatever. Yeah. Hi. Just giving it time for people to get on. My name is Sabne Raznik, and you will find links to my book that I am promoting right now and links to my website somewhere on here. And I also fixed it to where it will share on the Gallery Appalachia page as well as in the group at the same time. That's how it's supposed to work. In which case, then we don't have to go in and make a meeting room and do it that way, I hope. I hope it's working, is all I'm saying. Hope it's working. Y'all let me know if it's not. You can make a comment or something. We are here to promote Dreaming of Bono, which is my e-chat book that came out in May from Voicelux. And the actual link for that would be voiceluxjournal.wordpress.com. It should be on the video somewhere. If the book is free, you can get it regardless, but if you donate during the months of May and June, I will get the donations from that. So that's why I scheduled the book tour for May and June. If you access it after the end of June, it will still be there for you to get. It'll still be there. It'll still be free. But I will no longer get the donations because there will be a different featured e-chat book there after that. This book, the premise of it was kind of me working through some inner child issues, I guess. I mean, that's what psychologists call it, right? Inner child issues. Where I didn't really have a father figure, so I kind of made Bono into one. I know, weird. But I guess I could have chosen worse because, it could have been somebody who was into drugs or something. But anyway, oh good, it is working. Good, thank you, Byron. Yeah, I hope it's doing everything that it said it would do as far as sharing in both places at once and all of that stuff. So I didn't really have much of a father figure, so I made Bono into one, which is weird, but it kind of worked for me, and at least for a time. And then anyway, they released this set of albums, Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience, which was modeled on William Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience, because they're big William Blake fans. And when they released the second one of that, Songs of Experience, it kind of sounded to me like they were preparing the fan base for when U2 isn't going to be around anymore. Bono himself said that the album was like a series of letters to loved ones and friends in the aftermath of a serious health issue that he had. And you can tell. And so I'm listening to that, and I thought, I need to start working through some of this stuff. I'm an adult now, I can do this. And I started having dreams about Bono, and I decided to write them down, and that's pretty much what this collection is. It started out being, I would write them down very abstractly in such a way that you couldn't tell who the poems were about and that they were about dreams. And then as I went along, they got much more direct. And I think that was also part of the process, that the psychological process that I was going through. And I think I worked through what I needed to work through. But I just thought, I'll write this down. Why not? And out of it came this chat book. So it's called Dreaming of Bono. Like I said, you can find it at Voicelux. The first poem I'm going to read is one of the very abstract ones. So I kind of have to explain the dream to you. I had this dream that I was walking in Dublin with my family. I don't know if we were there as tourists or what. And usually when I dream about walking Dublin city, we're always walking north to south for some reason. So the dream starts out at Dublin Airport, and we walk from Dublin Airport all the way, and that's quite a hike on your feet, all the way to Trinity College, Dublin. And as we're walking along, we discover, because I'm disabled, and I'm disabled in the dream, and I'm like trying to walk, and it's so far, right? I'm on a walker, and it's like I get to the point I'm so tired, I'm literally counting steps just to keep going. And then we're trying to get on a bus, and we can't get on a bus because they're so full of people, and there's so many people trying to get on them. And we discovered that there's this big hurricane coming to Dublin, and which happens. It can happen. They're usually not huge. I think the biggest one they've had in my lifetime was a Category 3, but they do on occasion get hurricanes. It's becoming more of a thing with climate change and the breaking down of the Gulf Stream. Because the Gulf Stream is what protects the British Isles from all that. But the Gulf Stream is starting to break down. So it's happening more often, and the hurricanes are getting stronger. But anyways, it used to be a really rare thing. They find out that this big hurricane is coming, and we have like minutes to find a suitable shelter. So we just keep walking, till we get to Trinity College, Dublin. That's why we ended up there, because it's probably the strongest building in Dublin. It's built of stone. It's probably one of the oldest buildings in Dublin that's still standing. We ended up there, and then as we're getting ready to go inside, along comes Googie. Now, Googie is Bono's best friend. He's a visual artist. He does paintings that are kind of reminiscent of the Cold War era. He likes to use the Russian script in his paintings, and he has a thing with big giant bowls with gold in them. He's a good artist. I don't always get everything he does, but he's skillful at it, and I appreciate it. But his name is Googie. So anyway, in the dream, he shows up in a car, and he says, get in the car, we're going to Meath. Now, Meath is further inland than Dublin, so it would be safer. We're going to Meath, we're going now, we'll meet everybody in Meath. Get in the car. I'm like, okay, I'll get in because you're Googie. Because remember, I'm just a tourist. I'll get in because you're Googie, and I know you from reading about you my whole life. And anyway, so then we go driving off quite erratically to Meath. And that was basically the dream. So that's a lot of intro to this, because it's one of the abstract ones. This is not about you. I try to remember you, to see the future, to ground. I reach out with both hands. Are you listening now? Feeling seasick, adrift, buffeted in this long effort, desperate push, counting steps. No refuge, no release. Screaming seagulls warn rage is blowing. Mind the water. Where are we going? Meath. Some shallly defined name on a map alongside scree of city lights. Is it safety? A gathering on the lee of disaster? But who will survive? Who breathe? Who clean up my debris? Car wheels screech and strain, bending and careening, laws of physics shivering, island of poets dry drowning. Do you remember me? See the future aground? Do you reach out with both hands? I am listening now. Yeah, I kind of wish I had written that one more directly to begin with, because I have to do so much explaining. And then, of course, you see that whole, that this is actually psychological work coming in whenever I say who clean up my debris instead of the debris of Dublin after the storm, right? I'm like, no, who cleans up my debris? But as I went along, they got more and more direct. I'll read one of the more direct ones next. This is one that, in the readings that I've been doing to support the book, seems to be everybody's favorite. This is called In the Name of Love, and you'll recognize that as the name of one of their most famous songs, right? I think they wrote it as to support the campaign they were on at the time to make Martin Luther King Day a thing. I was not aware of that. Whenever I first became familiar with the song, I know because they say it pretty explicitly in one of the verses that they mention Martin Luther King's assassination pretty explicitly. But I was just 4. I was just 4 when that song came out, and MTV was a thing. You could still watch videos on MTV, and it was always playing in our house, and because MTV was a new thing, and that's where I saw it. And now, if you want to see the video now, you can still find it on YouTube. But yeah, I was like 4 when that song came out, so I really didn't grasp the full meaning of it till I got a little bit older. There's also another song in it that's referenced in here. I use a lyric from it. The lyric first appears in the Songs of Innocence album, and for the life of me I can't remember what they titled the song on that album, but it appears again as kind of a reprise on 13 on Songs of Experience album. So it does double duty, and I kind of like, I think it's used better in 13 than it is the first song they used it in. I really love that 13 song. So I pulled it out of that and stuck it in this poem. So there's the 2 songs that are referenced here. In the Name of Love. I am afraid, but I know you are too. Storms are screaming over this black sea of life. Your shadow supports me from behind as our tiny vessel sinks, and my hope, heavy in my hands like wet sand, weighs down my soul's pockets and washes out. You sing, hold on, there is a light, don't let it go out. Gasping, and together we push back against waves with our bare hands. There is sadness in our will, the courage of the noble, righteous doom to defy and defy until defiance kills us, because we must, if only for those who lack the strength to fight. There is no moon, there is just water, and more cold, salted water. You are not sure anymore. Love keeps you singing. That's all now, and that's enough. Sputtering, you clasp my shoulders firmly, and with fondness you pull me under. I surrender to your hold, giving even in death your body a floating raft for other lives, silenced yet forever singing hope. Dawn spears, horizons spray. Whenever I first started reading out of this book for the book tour, I stuck mostly to those kind of poems, and people were like, really? This poet, you think she's a serious poet, has written a book about Bono worship? It's kind of the reaction I got. But that's not all that's in this book. There are some poems that are critical of Bono to some degree, because that's what we do as children, right? And there's a poem that actually talks directly about this, where we take the example given by our parents, whether that's our parents who literally gave us birth or whatever parents we choose, as in this case, we take that example and we decide, we weigh it out. And as we grow up, this is a process that happens as we grow up. This is why the teen years are so difficult. We take that example and we weigh it out. And we take, okay, these are the things I want to keep and actually use. These are the things I want to integrate into me. And I might integrate them in a way that manifests itself completely different from the way it manifests itself in my parents, but, this I'm going to use. And then we have the other bits where we're like, ugh, no. We all do that. It's part of the process of growing up. And so there are some poems where I am deliberately calling out some things. So I'm going to share one of those. This is actually my favorite poem in the whole collection. I just shared you what seems to be everybody else's favorite poem. Now I'm going to share with you what is my favorite poem in this collection. It's called Conscience. And I'm looking to see if there's any references I need to talk about, but I don't think so. Okay, this is Conscience. You are the only consistent male voice in my ears since birth, and the most important thing you taught me was to follow the voice of my own conscience. Hang the consequence. And it's complicated. Sometimes I don't recognize you anymore. You have become the rock star in a box that you invented to mock your critics. Mocking and being are two completely different things. Black leather, sunglasses, philosophy sound bites for the media to dangle from, A-list flattery. It doesn't always look good on you. But we are seldom as black and white simple as anything called hero. And listening to our conscience can lead us to situations that appear on the outside to be hypocritical. I am not a child anymore. I know compromise is not a dirty word all the time, and I never wanted you in shining armor. No one can shine in blinding camera flash lightning. This is not my country. My country is not of this earth. I can't do what you taught me and what you tell me because they are not the same to me. I will do and say and think things others think are wrong, things you think are wrong. I won't fly flags or pick sides. I'm not here for that. This is not my country. And I will follow the voice of my own conscience, whatever the consequence. I hope you see yourself in that choice. Even if you don't understand the particulars, you taught me that. So that's my favorite poem in the whole thing. Calling him out just a little bit, and then at the same time going, but this is the good thing that I learned and decided to keep. Although it manifests differently for me than it does for you. Right? A lot of these poems I'm directly calling out his tendency to get so deeply involved in politics, and I don't. I am completely apolitical, so for me it's a matter of conscience to be completely apolitical. So see, you take these things and they manifest differently. That's just part of growing up. Here's another one, and this is fun to read, but it kind of calls him out too, but it's so fun to read. It starts out where I think that I am witnessing him manipulating other people for his own ends in my own apartment, right? I think I'm watching him do that. By the time I get to the end of the poem, though, the end of the dream, I realize he was using me, manipulating me to manipulate these people. So here I thought I was outside it and discovered I was part of it. But it's a fun poem to read, and it's called Manipulation. You walk in with an entourage of people smarter than me, or at least they think they are. But you brought them here because you know better. At a moment when I happen to be listening to an episode of Poem Talk Podcast, and things get weird fast. You brought wine, and you are pouring it into red cups from my pantry while some academic snob takes a cue from the podcast to riff on hermeneutics. And he's preaching Foucault, and I'm rolling my eyes and swallowing laughter when you said a drink meant for me on the desk where I have reseated, and I see you are taking this much too. So I reply, what do I know? Your look reproaches me. She likes to pretend she doesn't understand, you say to the talking head. She's lived more than you'll ever read about. I watch the sneer bloom on his face, drink my wine. He sits on your jacket, which you've thrown on the couch, and I realize he thinks he's better than you, too. Why are you leading him around? You always have a purpose for putting up with the pompous. What do you want from these people? You dim the lights and sit on the couch nearest the desk, and your earnestness and hanging on his words is physically painful to watch. I'm regretting the wine. It soured my stomach. Now he's bold enough that he's urinating out passive-aggressive critiques on the charming provincialism of the decor. I'm not even offended. I'm amused. You take off your shades, rub your eyes. Those eyes acknowledge the laughter in mine, and you turn the conversation to Africa. agenda revealed. But I don't fit into this picture, so I sit in my corner and watch you and your entourage like a movie. Your rock star charisma nudging these people to the conclusions you want them to draw without their realizing it. Shake my head. He thinks he's debated you down, and he takes out his vaporizer to smoke as a gesture of victorious emphasis. You can't smoke in here, I say. Medical reasons. There's a table and chairs on the porch. He vapes anyway. I stand up, lean across you, take it out of his mouth. How do you turn it off, I ask you. Who do you think you are, he barks as you oblige. It's my house, I reply. I'm going to bed, Di. Clean up before you leave, please. As I close the bedroom door, I hear you say to him, I told you. She's lived more than you'll ever read about. She sees through all bullsh. Now, are you ready to get real? And now I know where I fit in that picture. It kind of, to me, it has the feeling of a comedy almost, that poem. He's like, yeah, see, gotcha. Oh, and I mentioned in that poem, there was a mention of the Poem Talk podcast. That is a real podcast, hosted by Alfil Reese. I'm trying to remember the name of the college he teaches at the university, but I can't at the moment. He has a group on. If you go on Coursera.org, they have classes. It's one of those places where you can do college classes for free. You don't get a degree or credit in any way unless you pay for it, but you can at least learn this stuff. And if you ask me, that's more valuable than the piece of paper, because at least you still have the knowledge in your head. So I like to do a lot of classes on there, and they have this class on there called Modern and Contemporary Poetry or something like that. And the teacher is Al Faris, who is the host of the podcast. And so I took his class on Coursera in like 2016, I think, and that led me to the podcast. It's a really good podcast. If you're interested in that kind of thing. He gets like himself and two other poets get on there, and they'll take a poem by a totally different poet that's not even in the room and dissect it and analyze it. Okay, here's a poem called Patterns, and right away that signals to you, right, psychological realm, because there's certain vocabulary, jargon, that psychologists use, and inner child work is one. Another one is where they talk about patterns that you develop in childhood through your interaction with your parents and your siblings, and then how you perpetuate those into adulthood, and they're not always healthy. And so most of psychology is geared toward helping you to figure out ways, like, because a lot of what we read about psychology is like, oh yes, okay, I recognize that in myself. But actually talking to a professional therapist in that setting, that whole medical setting, I guess it's a medical setting, isn't it? Because it's mental health. I think it would be more helpful if we thought of it that way. It would be less of a stigma on it. That kind of setting takes you from, okay, yes, I recognize this in myself, to this is how we can break the pattern, right? That's what it's about. And that's one of the words they use a lot, pattern. So I grabbed that word because I'm really interested in psychology, and I read a lot of psychology. I grabbed that word and just riffed on it. And this poem came out. Patterns. In another pattern, not shattered, not consciously relevant, just another, like a beloved voice, beloved soul, reduced, distilled, semi-erased into mere recording, we court. We close around each other to each other. The doors like rude red stop signs. How to address the parents. The beginnings never recovered from. In another pattern, still a pattern after a pattern, the words in sterile text on boring white page, you must feel and taste the color that is lacking. A bird's whirring wings just out of view, but panicked in your ear. Hope making a ruckus to get your attention. In another pattern, yet electrically alive. Let's see. The difference between a print book and an ebook is, when you're doing a reading like this, is a little bit annoying, because when you have a print book, you can just choose your poems ahead of time, stick bookmarks in there, and then you can just flip and you're there, flip and you're there, flip and you're there, and there's no awkward pauses. But when you read from an ebook, generally your only option is to just scroll until you get to a new poem. So I apologize if there's any long awkward pauses while I'm looking for the next poem. Here's one, Rainy Day, and this is one of the abstract ones that was in the beginning. And if you're a big U2 fan, right, you become immersed in the whole Irish culture, the Irish mythologies, Cuchulainn and all that, and the various Irish writers like Beckett and James Joyce and Bernard Shaw, not someone I recommend because he was also a eugenicist for a brief period. He's the one that actually came up with the whole idea of gassing people to death. George Bernard Shaw, yes. Let that sink in and shock you a little bit. I'm not a big fan of Shaw, but like to understand exactly what's going on in the U2 songs and in the catalog, you become immersed in the culture. You kind of have to. You learn about all these different people. Like I said, the Songs of Innocence and the Songs of Experience albums, to fully understand them, you have to have read Blake, right? So it's like you become immersed in this whole deep cultural exploration of Ireland. And so a lot of that comes out in this collection. There are found poems from Beckett and James Joyce, and there's this poem which references Jonathan Swift and Gulliver's Travels. And how that ended up happening was the neighborhood that Bono grew up in, 10 Cedarwood Road, is so close to Glasnevin that sometimes it gets confused as Glasnevin. It's got a different name and I can't think of it right now. Ballyman, right. I had to think of the 7 towers and see, which is the Ballyman Towers. And then I remember the neighborhood he grew up in is called Ballyman, but it's so close to Glasnevin that sometimes they end up being used interchangeably. And that's why sometimes in some interviews, people will say he's from Glasnevin. No, he's from Ballyman, but they were really close together. Well, anyway, Glasnevin is the neighborhood where they have the Glasnevin National Cemetery. Now, the thing with that is, how England buries like all their famous writers at Westminster Abbey, Shakespeare is there, we could go on and on. It's like where if you're one of the great British writers, you get buried at Westminster Abbey, or your grave gets moved there at some point in history, and it's considered a great honor, right? Glasnevin National Cemetery is like Ireland's version of that. And so Jonathan Swift and a whole bunch of others are buried at the Glasnevin National Cemetery. And so really close there to where Bono lived. And he has mentioned that at different times. The cemetery and the botanical gardens he's talked about quite a bit in interviews and stuff. So there's a Gulliver's Travels reference in this poem. I know it's convoluted, but that's how the U2 library works too. If you want to fully understand the songs, you gotta dig deep, and sometimes the references can be really like labyrinthy like that. Well, it turned out this way in this poem too. Rainy Day. When the rain comes gentle, I will be here to listen. Peaceful, piddle-puddling, rivulets rolling like tiny rivers, widening into Lilliputian oceans. full of your voice across distance and time to tell all the things you didn't say you ought to have said before our time wound down cracks to underground waters, submerged and raging and changing the landscape of us, still unseen and mostly unheard, irresistibly. God help me, I chose you. I won't take that decision back. That's one of the more abstract ones too. Here's one of the found poems that I pulled from. There's one from Beckett. There's a couple from Joyce. I've read everything that Joyce has ever written. I've read a lot of Beckett, not all of Beckett, because there's a lot, and my journey with him started just a couple years before the pandemic, so I'm new into that, and I have to read him slowly because I can be triggered by Beckett. When I first started reading Beckett, I was worried because it comes across as being the most ableist thing you will ever read, and you know, being disabled, it triggers me all over the place. I mean, like physically triggers me. It makes me physically sick sometimes, and I had a big problem with that. And then I was like, I need to talk to a professor or something, somebody who teaches Beckett, knows what they're talking about. So I went on this, just before the pandemic started, I went on this thing where I was emailing people all over the place who teach Beckett. And nobody wanted to touch this with a 10-foot pole. They're like, oh no, she's talking about disability in Beckett, and nobody wanted to touch it. Which is odd to me, because disability is like front and center in Beckett's work. Almost all of his main characters are disabled or become disabled over the course of the book. And so it seems to be an extremely important thing. Like the whole point of Beckett revolves around disability. So I was like, why does nobody want to discuss this? I finally found a scholar in Ireland, not where his papers are kept, a different college on the West Coast, who is also disabled, but she did her thesis on Beckett. So I'm like, I got these questions. Can you answer them? And she was like, no, I have the same issues with Beckett, but I haven't been able to figure that out myself. So if you find anything out, let me know. And I'm like, okay, well, at least she was willing to answer me. I eventually did find a paper available online, but you could only read the introduction to it, that addressed my issue. And so I just kept emailing the university where the student who originally wrote it at, because it used to be that you could only access it if you were a student of that college. So I just kept emailing them and kind of pestering them until they finally sent me the whole thing. And after I read it, it opened up Beckett for me, and I realized he seems ableist, but he's actually on our side. He's making some very valid points about what it's like being a disabled person in an able-bodied person's world. So I've made that journey, and I made my peace with Beckett. It was a mess, though, for a while. And now you Google Beckett and disability, and there's tons of discussion about it. So I hope that my effort to figure that out for my own well-being triggered the discussion. Because now you Google it, and there's lots of stuff. But this, anyway, I pulled this from Joyce. This is from Ulysses. And June 16th is Bloomsday, which means in Dublin, everybody dresses in an Edwardian dress, which was the time period that Joyce was writing in. And they walk around Dublin to all the places he mentions in the novel Ulysses. Which, although Dublin has changed quite a lot, you can still follow the route. And a lot of the places are still there. So it's a big deal every year to go there on Bloomsday and follow the route. And I pulled this from Ulysses, called Bloom's poem. Traveller Leopold said he should go otherwhither, and the learning knight let pour for child Leopold a draught. He took the cup that stood before him, for him never needed none asking. Let us speak of that fellowship that was there, to the intent to be drunken, for they were right witty scholars. Sir Leopold, which never durst laugh too open, young Stephen filled all the cups that stood empty. Hereupon Punch Costello dinged with his fist on the board, and would sing a bawdy catch To bed was the burden of it to be played. Look forth, my people, upon the land of behest. We wail, batten, sport, clisp, clasp, sunder, dwindle, die. Over us dead they bend. Joyce is my favorite of the two. Obviously, but Beckett considers Joyce his mentor, which I find fascinating because they were such totally different people. I have a sneaking suspicion, I have no proof of this, but I have a sneaking suspicion that we know that Joyce went blind over his lifetime from trying to write books, right? He eventually went blind. In fact, when he finished Finnegan's Wake, he had to have it proofread by somebody else because he could no longer see, which had to be interesting since it was so extremely avant-garde. Beckett considered Joyce his mentor, and I have a sneaking suspicion that Beckett maybe was a touch autistic and never diagnosed, just from reading his work and the fact that he was such a recluse and everything. Here's a found poem from Beckett. And like I said, I brought these references in because that's part of being immersed in the YouTube culture, is to be immersed in Irish culture. Beckett's poem. A few images on and off in the mud, earth, sky, a few creatures in the light, some still standing. Where now? Who now? Unquestioning. Something's wrong there. It's the beginning of my life, or no worse, saying to myself, you're no worse and was worse. I shall not be alone. In the beginning I am, of course, alone. When the sack is empty, that family, something wrong there. It wasn't a dream. I didn't dream that. Going nowhere, coming from nowhere, these notions of forebears where lamps are lit at night and other such, like all that was not then is. Beckett's quite a trip to read too, because Finnegan's Wake is avant-garde in its own way, but Beckett is avant-garde in the sense that he's not a fan of sentences or paragraphs. You can read like 50 pages before you come to a paragraph break. So sometimes you can just open the book and be daunted by that full block of text and be like, no, I'm done. It takes some determination. And of course everybody knows Waiting for Godot, right? Here's another one that is kind of critical of the whole Bono worship thing. This is called Too Much. Oops, wait a minute. What happened there? Word's doing something weird. There we go. Stop doing that, Microsoft Word. Too much. Room is tinny, childlike a music box. High-pitched notes from a distance in your voice. Exhausted, thin, but still velvet on skin behind an unseen door down a nearby corridor. It's late, and I steady myself on the first sturdy object to hand. Under my fingers, your replaced black shirt wet with show sweat. I recoil and lean against cold backstage wall, listen to echoes of fan squeals and raucous after party. But I grew up in semi-dark, semi-quiet, alone in a crowd, muted and blue. I don't know how to say this. Sometimes you're not enough. When I don't recognize the world I live in, and loneliness reminds me that it is and always has been my best friend when the world is alien and you are too much of it. I think that line throws some people off, though, about where I'm like, it's late and I steady myself on the first sturdy object at hand. That's a reference to disability, right? If you have mobility issues, you can't stand freehand, what I call freehand, for a long time. And especially if you've been on your feet for 2.5 hours dancing during a concert, there's no way you're going to be able to stand up freehand after that. You'd be very fortunate if you can even walk after that. So, I put my hand on something, right, to hold on. And it happened to have his shirt on it. Gross. Yeah, that's what that image is in that poem. Because sometimes I dream that I'm able-bodied. I do, sometimes, but it's rare. Okay, Swallow Me Suddenly. This is a poem about, after they released the Songs of Experience album, they did the tour, and then they had a scheduled break that ended up coinciding with the pandemic. They were going to take a break anyway. But that whole period of time was a bit odd. I thought that something was off with Bono the whole time. During the tour itself, he would only do interviews with Edge. He would never do interviews alone, and he didn't move around as much at the concerts. He stayed pretty much behind the mic. I just thought something was wrong. I've been watching him my whole life, right? And I just got vibes that something was wrong. And I was a little bit worried about him. And he got quiet. When he did those interviews with Edge, he let Edge do most of the talking, which is not him at all. And I was just watching all this and like, what's going on here? Now, when he came out of lockdown to support that animated movie he did, what was it called? Sing? When he came out of lockdown to support that, he was doing interviews alone again. He's more like himself. So whatever it was he's going through, he conquered that, whatever it was. But which is good to see. I'm relieved to see that. But anyway, this poem comes from that period of time where he was being a little bit strange and a little bit quiet in comparison to him. He's just not a quiet guy. So this is called Swallow Me Suddenly. Words have power that must be honored. Choose them with care, Heaney said. Seamus Heaney. Repeating the profound adage of the North, whatever you say nothing. But you and I are not taciturn and reticent by nature, even when it would be wise. Our mouths, like our souls, demand to be open, raging with fire, a double-edged light burn, and when rage subsides and the last embers die, cold dark will announce undeniably the need we filled with our jabbering recklessness. I have learned silence is just as deadly as a misplaced word. I was never graceful. That tightrope dance between caution and expression is not one I can master. You have gone comparably quiet with age. I suspect silence to catch me, not by slow degrees as it is swallowing you, but suddenly and whole. At least I hope so, right? Nobody wants to linger on for a long time as their health continues to climb, which will most likely be the case for me because of my disability, right? But we all hope that it'll be a faster process. I mean, let's just be honest. Yeah, I mentioned Seamus Heaney there, and then the profound adage of the North, meaning Northern Ireland, and it's a saying that arose from the Troubles, and Heaney used it a lot in his work. I think he actually wrote a poem titled that, Whatever You Say Nothing, which was that very careful dance that you had to do if you lived in the North, and Seamus Heaney was a master of it, where whatever you say nothing incredibly important, that way you don't offend anybody. And Seamus was great at it. He was very careful at choosing his words, even in interviews. It's a skill I don't have. But that's where that came from. And there's even a song, Whatever You Say Nothing. There's a song, there's a whole song that came out of the Troubles. It's an Irish folk song that came out of the Troubles, and that's the chorus. So, I mean, if you Google it, you're going to find exactly the kind of context I'm talking about there. Okay, I've been reading almost an hour, I think, so I'm going to end it. You know what's funny is I thought this is an e-chat book, meaning it's not a full-size book. You could probably read the whole thing in an hour. But I guess once I explain the references and everything, because I haven't read the whole thing, and we've been reading almost an hour. But this is the poem that closes it, and this I think is where, the reason why I put this as the last poem is, this is the one where I woke up and said, I've worked through whatever it is I needed to work through, and released whatever it is I needed to release there, right? This is that poem. It's called Goodbye. The power went out at the show. No terrorist event, just an unforeseen outage. But the microphone still works somehow. Everyone stay calm and in your seats. We'll resume the show when the issue is resolved, you announced, and then, with Graham carrying a blue flashlight, you made the rounds, walking a giant, undulating circle around the arena, talking with fans who had turned on the lights in their phones. When the lights came back up, you kept chatting until you'd made the circuit. I was holding onto the railing with one hand, phone in the other, watching your progress. You climbed the 5 steps up to me with a smile. Is everyone okay here? Need anything? The crew are coming around with a free round of Guinness, and we'll get the show underway soon. Just some tech to check out first. How many times have you repeated that? I shook your hand. I just want you to know, your music saved my life. Thank you. Something in you softened, and you wrapped me up in leather and drying sweat for a genuine hug, a fleeting moment, and replied, it saved my life too. Thank you for that. Then a fan from the next row up snatched your sleeve, camera already flashing, and you were gone. Da, you were gone. And I knew I didn't need you that way anymore. Graham. I always forget to explain who Graham is before I read this. Graham is Bono's bodyguard, I guess you could say. He famously does not travel with security, but sometimes you will see this white-headed guy walking around behind him or close to him at the Donkey Book Festival that he literally just did to support his memoir that's coming out in November. He went to the Donkey Book Festival to read from his book, and you'll see in the video from the news clip from RTE News, he goes into the pub, and right behind him is this white-headed man, and he walks in behind Bono and closes the door behind him, and he's like between him and the press. That's Graham, in case you didn't know. Most hardcore U2 fans know who Graham is, because we're used to seeing him. And he's pretty friendly because Bono is not uptight about security. And living in Dublin, you really don't have to be. Dublin's like, it's the capital of a whole country, but it has a small town vibe, I'm told. I haven't been there myself yet. One day. But that is the last poem in the collection, and I think it's a good collection to end the reading on. I hope you guys have enjoyed this, and if you didn't get to see it live, it'll still be on the page, I think, for you to see later. It should be in the Gallery Appalachia group as well. Okay. It was supposed to stream in both places at the same time, so I hope that worked out. And I hope you guys enjoyed this. Yeah. Again, you can get the whole chapbook for free, unless you choose to donate to the press. You can get it for free at voiceluxjournal.wordpress.com. And actually, this is my last event for my book tour. I'm wrapping it up tonight. I should have had a little flourish here to celebrate with, a piece of chocolate or something to be like, hey, but I forgot. I'll do that after. But yeah, hopefully I'll see you next time I put a book out, which shouldn't be too far from now. I've got 2 in manuscript phase, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I've enjoyed our time together. I hope you enjoyed the poems. It really was just me working through psychology, and it's just a bit of fun. It's one of those collections that isn't meant to be taken too seriously, right? Just read it, have a good laugh, and some fun. So thank you very much for coming, and Donna Dago Ha'i, till we meet again.